There we go. We're off. We're off with the races.
We're on. And to Dave E. out there, we're right on time, Dave.
Yeah, Dave. Jesus criminy. We got guys texting John and I and sending notes out like, hey, man, it's time to roll. It's like, no, it's time to roll when we're ready to roll.
And we are ready, Pete.
Here we go.
So Jared is handling the board. Pete, wow.
What the hell?
It looks like my light fell over there, Pete.
You know, it's funny that John says that because I'm sitting here and right before we came on, part of the little pause was I got this ring light up here and all of a sudden out of nowhere, it just started swooping over to the side and falling over. I'm like, what in the hell? Oh, well.
Live streaming shows.
That's right.
Well, welcome everybody. There it goes again.
All right, the hell with it. You're fine. Your color's great.
Well, the Rebel's Edge.
Yeah, it's the Rebel's Edge, all right. It's edgy as hell.
Got to be a rebel. So thank you for joining us today, folks. It is the 8th of March. He's Pete Najarian. I'm John Najarian. And we're going to give you the Macro Minute right about now. And Macro Minute today is basically the 2-year holding above 5%. And the 210 spread, basically 100 basis points. ADP employment and JOLTS all came in a little stronger than expected, pretty much endorsing what Fed Chairman Jay Powell said yesterday. That's my macro, Pete. How about you?
I got 2 words for you. Jerome Powell. That's it. I mean, honestly, John, everything that he said yesterday, the moment he started to speak, and we talked about this on the Rebel's Edge yesterday, stock went down, 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 only to finish down an incredible, basically damn near 2% for the Dow. Today, seeing something a little bit similar. All of a sudden, Jerome gets up there and we start watching the Dow just take it in the teeth. It's not his fault, but it's some of the commentary that he's throwing out there. And we got to stop these other Fed guys, John, from commenting day after day after day. I don't remember that in the past at all, but it certainly is something that I think is creating a lot of issues within the market itself.
Yeah, there aren't a lot of smiles except from the Bears today, folks.
Yeah. And
not the Chicago Bears, but we're going to get to that. So let's talk, Pete, about CrowdStrike. They came out with earnings. Shares are up 3%. They were up 6%. And this is one of those cybersecurity firms that really has been back and forth and pretty volatile. What's your take on where it is now and whether it should have held the rally that it had in the pre-market?
I think it should have held, John. Their numbers were absolutely extraordinary. You look at the earnings, what they were able to put up there versus what was expected, and you look what they did a year ago and look what they're doing now. All of that. And you talk about AI, I was listening to CNBC today. All they can talk about is AI and all they talk about is NVIDIA. It ain't just NVIDIA, by the way. There's a lot of other companies out there in the AI space that are doing great things. And one of them is CrowdStrike. So they've got their AI cybersecurity, John. I think that's a big, huge gain for them. And I think that's something that's probably not appreciated enough just yet. It will be at some point in time. This is a company with great fundamentals on top of everything else. So because of that, I like the fact that it's eased off that 6% down to about a 3% gain. I'm really looking at this one close, John, because I think given what the 52-week highs were and where we were on the lows and where the stock is right now, I think that this thing looks pretty solid right here, and the earnings reflect that.
Yeah, $30 or thereabouts above the 52-week low, $120 below the 52-week high.
Yeah.
Now, a high or a low don't ever mean that is the line in the sand. We're just pointing out it's definitely towards the cheaper end rather than the more expensive end of its recent one-year history.
Yeah.
So I tend to agree with you, Pete. I'm on this one looking for an entry point. How about Weight Watchers? This one, oh my gosh, down hard and 8 times normal volume. They missed on expectations in a pretty big way. Earnings and basically their outlook, neither of which was very positive. And then they bought a telehealth company that's basically going to give you drugs, mainly to get you skinny, I guess, Pete.
Yeah, here's the weird part, John. They don't want to be called Weight Watchers anymore. They're just WW. I mean, that's part of the problem as well. They don't want to address what they are and who they are. And yet, all they do is they can't get people to lose weight, but they certainly can get people to lose money if they buy their stock, because the stock just goes down, 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 down. And it's for all the right reasons, though. When you look at what their numbers look like, John, revenue's down 14%, earnings are down 13%. Their net loss is a couple of $100 million. They got some issues over there, and they're going to have to start figuring this thing out, because that stock's getting beat up for all the right reasons, and they are sitting on a boatload of debt. Their debt level versus their cash, John, is about $1.3 billion. So that's something that doesn't look so great either. So if you're not making a lot of money and yet you've got all this debt and you're sitting there watching your stock go lower and lower, I think it might be time for them to start figuring something out, and they got to figure it out in a hurry before these guys go down for the count.
You look at a 5-year chart, Pete, it was $101. And that was back in the day when Oprah was basically putting her stamp of approval on it and her reputation on it. Yep. You look at it now at $5 a share. Oh,
not
looking so swell.
No.
Well, take a look now at Arlo, folks. And we wanted Jared to put up a little pic of Arlo, and there it is, because you've probably seen these at Best Buy and so forth. And these devices, of course, they can be like a Ring doorbell. You guys have heard of that. Google bought that. They can also be security for your home, not just visual, but alarm systems and so forth, Wi-Fi and all that kind of thing. Arlo, that's what they do. And it's a great alternative, I guess, Pete, because you don't have to have it monitored. You could have your own security system, and without the monthly monitoring fee, it's pretty cheap, just a one-time fee to install the stuff. But the numbers that we saw today were pretty impressive, and the stock was up 30% on those numbers.
Yeah. Well, you're exactly right, John. The only issue still is they're still losing money. But the positive side of that, the flip side of that, is they're not losing it at the same rate that they once were. They lost last year at this quarter about 8 cents, and today losing about 4 cents. So they are improving. They were actually expected to lose about 11 cents. So when you look at some of those numbers and you're starting to see some of the growth that they've got, a lot of what they're doing right now, John, if they can continue to get those gains and get themselves into positive territory, this is a company that's got some pretty solid, I think the fundamentals look pretty good. Their revenue growth of 13%, their services revenue growth is a little over 30%. They've got some positives that you definitely could lean on. I'd love to see these guys be able to start showing us, though, they can start making money. And I think that they're on the verge of that. And I think as we look forward into 2023, we probably will see that in the next couple of quarters. So has this thing gotten a pretty daggone cheap? I'd say it is. And I think that there's a lot of good reasons why it might be time to start looking at this one a little bit closer. It might not be time yet, but it's getting very, very close. And I think if we can see any gains over the next quarter or two, which I think we will, this thing has a good shot to actually start testing and pushing up towards those 52-week highs.
Like it. I like Arlo, and I like basically anything that helps you get Wi-Fi extended in your home and or some security. I think those are two big things that people will purchase at a Best Buy or on Amazon or whatever. And there's competitors in the space, though. This is not like they're the first mover and the only mover. But yeah, I like the stock, Pete. All right. What about United Natural Foods? This was down 36% about an hour ago. Now it's down 27%. The earnings, they missed by about 50 cents, Pete. They were expected to make $1.38. They made somewhere in the 70s. Revenue, that was right in line, but they cut outlook for the year. And when you're cutting outlook and you're missing on profit by that much, by basically 30 some odd %, you're going to be in trouble. And this stock's been in trouble all day long.
There's a good reason this thing's sitting on the 52-week lows and just barely got off of those lows, but for all the right reasons, John. They really, I don't remember actually seeing anybody miss by this kind of a number. I mean, this is pretty amazing. And then when you look at the forecast, that doesn't look so great either. They almost threw up their hands practically and said, you know what, we got no idea. They're getting pinched. They're obviously the margins are something that's there. They talk about their revenue, but the problem is they are profits, and the profits, that's an issue. And until that can get fixed, they've got to figure this thing out, John. I don't know if they've got to raise prices. They got to be able to do something, but they're complaining about absolutely everything that we used to hear more about. And they're still talking about, well, there's supply chain issues. Well, there's this, there's that. Well, the problem is they better figure that out in a hurry, because the stock has been absolutely pummeled to the downside. And quite honestly, I think it's for the right reasons. And I am not ready to start saying, well, on these lows, this thing has a great opportunity, because that forecast was not impressive at all.
Nope, certainly wasn't. And their margins just keep shrinking, Pete. Yep. And, you know, when people are getting squeezed, they're not going to be buying organic. There are people who are very, they've got enough money that they don't need to worry about the difference between organic blueberries and regular blueberries. But there's a lot of other people, Pete, who will not buy the organic when it's $1 more per pint or whatever it might be. And I think that's their real problem right now. They just can't push prices the way that, like you said, they need to raise prices. I don't think they can. I think the revenue numbers miss pretty badly if they do that, because people will trade down. Well, let me talk about Victoria's Secret, Pete. One of my favorite things to talk about is women's underwear. And Victoria's Secret is one of those plays for the space. Now, here's the bad news, though. Stock's $34, and somebody steps in and buys 10,000 of the May 30 puts. So those are $4 below where the market is trading. They're buying those because they want protection. They think it's going down. Meanwhile, they were taking a profit, Pete, on already being right about the May 35 puts. So we're following somebody who's been right. They made money. Now, instead of getting out, they rolled down, and 10,000 is a million share equivalent, because every option's for 100 shares. So you get the idea. This is a bet that it just keeps sinking all the way out there till May, which is basically covering their next earnings report.
Yeah, well, it's one of my favorite stocks as well, John. But you know what? Things seem like they're a little bit under pressure right now, and there's competitives. I mean, the space that they're in clearly is seeing more and more competition, and that's been happening to a lot of the folks in the retail world specifically, and other things that they do. But it is interesting. I think they're going to be under pressure. I've got a different one for you in a totally different world. I'm looking at intelligent software, John. Peter Thiel's company, Palantir Technology. Now, stock is sitting down there underneath $8.50, or very close to that level. $8.25 to $8.50 is where it seems to have been trading most of the day. And right out of the gate, literally the first unusual option of the day that we had seen was some of the buying in there. They bought 15,300 of the March 10th. Now we are at, March 8th today, so there ain't a whole lot of days left, but we've got a little bit more than 48 hours left in front of us before these expire. But the stock is right there. So they bought the 8.5 calls. They paid 12 cents up to about 32 cents for those options. Fairly inexpensive. I like the risk reward. And if this thing can make a little bit of a move past that 850 level and start to dart up a little bit further, anything on a positive, we are starting to see. I'm just looking, and I just looked as you were talking, John. NASDAQ is back in positive territory. Maybe we start to get a little bit of a lift. If so, I think this is one of those names that can move to the upside. They got a phenomenal balance sheet, by the way. So I think from that standpoint, this is a company that has a chance to maybe get a lift. Will it get a lift fast enough? I think it will. I'm part of this trade.
Nice. Well, Pete, let's break down a little sports, shall we? Yeah. Because you cover it every week on your Sunday huddle, sports huddle on WCCO radio, which you can also pick up, folks, on Odyssey if you have the Odyssey app. NFL dominoes are falling, and the QBs are starting to move, Pete. Tell us about it.
They are. And it's pretty interesting, John, because it's exactly what you and I discussed just the other day. We were talking about it on Sunday, but you and I think on the Monday show, we were talking about, once they start to fall, the dominoes start to get into place. And what does that really mean? Well, Derek Carr out of nowhere, and I don't know if I heard anybody talking about this. Maybe Stephen A will pretend he did, but I don't think he did. But somebody out there probably did call this, but Derek Carr decides to go with the Saints. And that was a big move. And you and I talked a little bit about that. He finally, for the first time in his career, will have a defensive side of the football that actually is somewhere in the top 5. He's not had that at all with the Raiders. And it was a great move. But once he signed that deal, all of a sudden the dominoes start to move around. Lamar Jackson, now he's part of a deal. Now, it's not a permanent thing, though, John. There's possibilities within what they've done with Lamar Jackson where he could still negotiate. There still could be some trades, 2 first-rounders, all the rest of it. It's very complicated. No need to get into all of that. But as of right now, he'd be sitting there making $32 million. That doesn't seem too bad for the Ravens if he stays there and decides to do that. Daniel Jones just signed a big contract with the Giants. A lot of people were wondering what direction they were going to take. $160 million. That's a pretty decent deal. And then Geno Smith, a 3-year deal for $105 million, $52 million of that in the first year. So that's not so bad for Geno either. And by the way, well-deserved, because that guy stepped in and took a team that was nothing with Russell Wilson. They did get all those draft picks and everything else and a lot of players, but that team turned it around pretty daggone quick. I think, John, that we're going to see a little bit more of this because you've still got Aaron Rodgers out there, and the entire Jets world decided to go out there. The owner, the GM, the head coach, offensive coordinator, quarterback coach, everybody got onto a plane and flew out to California to sort of pitch themselves to Aaron Rodgers and probably kind of feel him out and look him right in the eyes after he came out of the dark tent. They probably wanted to see are his eyes dilated or something, or what's going on, But it's pretty interesting, John, and I think that we're going to see more and more of this, and it's great because we're finally starting to see this start to come together as we hoped. So what do you think? Does Aaron Rodgers at this point in time, does he go to the Las Vegas Raiders? Does he go to the San Francisco 49ers? Does he go to the Jets after that big conversation with the entire team basically? Well, I think that's the interesting thing is what happens with Aaron Rodgers. And you have any feel at all about Tom Brady? Because he's getting kicked around again already, John.
I know. I don't think Brady's going to come back and play, Pete. He could, of course, because he still was one of the high, he was upper echelon this past year on a terrible team with very few weapons around him, Pete. And he still got him to the playoffs. But I think that overall, the Jets would be a great fit for Rodgers, as would the Raiders, quite frankly, Pete.
Yep.
And obviously, if you go to the Raiders, you've got zero tax on half of your earnings because the way it works in the NFL, folks, it's the Jordan rule for taxes. And that is you get taxed based on where you played. So just because you're in a zero tax state does not mean that you don't get taxed for all of the games that you play in New York, which is a 14% tax state, or California, which is likewise probably close to 14% state tax. But to have half of that $50 or $60 million contract not taxed at the state level would be something interesting for Rodgers, perhaps. But I think the last place he's really wanting to stay and play, Pete, is Green Bay. But let me ask you this, because we had O.J. Simpson talking about whether or not we'd see Lamar Jackson, and O.J. was rooting for him to come on out to Vegas and so forth. And you and I, poked a little fun at the juice for that. But let me ask you about this. Why do they call it free agency, Pete? Because when I was a free agent, when you were a free agent, people didn't have to give up anything to get you. That was free agency.
Yeah.
This is, as of the 15th of March, you can make the announced deal, but it's not free agency because you're going to have to pay multiple draft choices and a lot of potentially even money to get a deal done. Why do they call it free agency still?
Yeah, it's just a different style of free agency, John. It's at least opening it up that these guys are essentially on the chopping block, but here's what you're going to have to do if you want them. Now, it does change a little bit as we get a little bit further out. You mentioned March 15th. I'll just jump to the next thing, John, because that's where we're going to talk about a little bit of this free agency, so why not? So here's the deal. Come March 15th, a lot of these teams, as you know, we've started to hear more and more, you know what, are we going to be able to pay this guy? I'll give you a great idea. Like for the Minnesota Vikings, they got a linebacker that is going to be a free agent because they're releasing him because they can't afford to pay him the money they've been paying him, John. So he becomes a free agent, just free and clear. And March 15th is when they can start dealing with these types of things. And there are also others out there and plenty of others. And that's where it gets kind of interesting. I'll tell you what I like that I'm seeing, John. I think there's some great opportunities for teams to really maybe turn it around with free agency, as well as obviously the draft, which is coming up not that many months away either after this whole combine deal. But Orlando Brown. Now, this guy, you know, we talk about all these guys in the combine, right? But they still got to adjust to the NFL world. I mean, very few first-year players have huge impacts. Some of them have impacts for sure. Many of them not gigantic impacts when they get there. But if you get a guy like an Orlando Brown, who unbelievable for the Chiefs. Now, the Chiefs could still re-sign him, John. They could say, you know what? We don't know that we could afford you because based on this and this and this, but here's what we could give you. And he may want to stay there because you know what? He's looking behind him and he goes, I got Mahomes behind me. Maybe we got a few more Super Bowls to win, you know, rather than taking all the money and going somewhere else where he has no shot at the playoffs even. I mean, a lot of these guys understand that world and the time frame that they're trading it, John. But they got a guy named Mike McGlinchey, who's been a tackle now for the 49ers. I think one of the best in football. And he's another one, like Orlando Brown. He's a big offensive tackle who's athletic as hell, and he is unbelievable. Where should he go, or does he want to stay with the Niners? And I'll tell you, he may stay with the Niners if they get the right quarterback, but if they don't in the next couple of weeks, week and a half or so, he might just say to himself, you know what? I'd rather go somewhere else where I maybe have a little bit better chance with, you know, whatever quarterback he'd like to play for. So it's all kind of fun. I look at this guy Schultz, the tight end from the Dallas Cowboys as well, John. Unbelievable player. Nobody talks about him. He doesn't look all that athletic, but the guy, all he does is put up numbers every single year. And he's become one of the better tight ends, I think, in the league because he can play wide out. He can play in the slot. He can play right on the line. He can do it all. And he's another kid out of Stanford. Kind of reminds me of the running back that the 49ers decided to take last year that really helped turn their season around. So McCaffrey. So there's a lot of different things and different places people can go. I got one last one for you. Zach Allen. You don't know who he is. Very few people probably know his name. And the reason is he was the other side of J.J. Watt with the Arizona Cardinals. But he's a kid, John, that went to high school with my kids in New Canaan, Connecticut. And then he goes off to Boston College and breaks all of the records for sacks, goes pretty high. I think he's a first rounder. He goes out to Arizona. And this is a guy that I had signed, sealed, and delivered to the Golden Gophers, and they didn't do it. They decided not to take the kid. He goes out there, and he's not just a starter. I mean, they are saying that he is one of the better players in the NFL, not just on that team. And J.J. Watt, and he learned a lot just playing with him. So it's interesting, and there's a lot of free agents out there. But I think this year, John, we're going to see more than ever before a lot of guys that have that free agency ability, but will re-sign with the team they're at right now. Well,
let me ask you this, Pete. What about the Giants? Since they just doled out $160 million to Jones, Daniel Jones, as you said, can they afford Shaquan Barkley. I
Yeah.
mean, the kid is a freak show, but can they afford him for what he wants? This is a 26-year-old guy that every team would love to have.
Yeah. That's what makes these, you know what? That's why the good GMs can figure it out and the other guys can't, John. But there's ways that you can move and shift around a little bit. But that is why the NFL is the best. It's why everybody watches it. It's why when you look at ratings of the NBA, the NHL, MLB, whoever it is, then look at a preseason game for the NFL or some meaningless game in the NFL, that's why those ratings are still triple and quadruple what those other sports have, because they have figured it out to make it a better, competitive, very exciting sport, more so than ever before. But these GMs, they got their work cut out for them, John, because if you've got Saquon, and he's a great player, we all know that. He's absolutely a freak athletically, unbelievably gifted guy, but he works it as well. But the problem is, how many guys can you pay, right? I mean, can you afford to give him the money he deserves? Probably not, to be able to keep him. So they are going to have to really work it, John, and those GMs can do a good job. But when you start working it too much and you've got too much money in 2 or 3 or 4 guys, you start to lose a lot that's around them, whether that's offensive linemen or maybe defensive linemen or DBs, wide receivers. It is a complicated system that the NFL's got, but it's working. And that part of it is working really, really well. So I give Roger Goodell credit for that, because I know I've been harsh on these guys. He deserves it, but this part of things they've done a great job with.
Yeah. Well, what I'd love to see too, Pete, is a guy like Marcus Davenport, down there with the Saints. I'd love to see him get with a team that needs another edge rusher. Mm-hmm. Buffalo kind of sagged at the end of the year once they lost our friend Von Miller. Yeah. One of our friend Kristen Kaliga's clients with the Buffalo Bills. But when you lost that edge rush from that side, boy, it made a huge difference in terms of, that's why Cincinnati came in there, Pete, and they didn't have to double team Von Miller, because Vaughn was on the sidelines on crutches because he had to get surgery a couple weeks earlier. That's a tough loss. He'll be back, but I think a guy like Davenport, who's one of the profile rush guys available from the veteran side, I think that's an interesting acquisition by somebody. I'm not saying the Bills, but by somebody.
Yeah. Well, and I think the unique thing that's going on in the NFL now is it used to be you wanted to have the veteran guys. Now you kind of almost want to have these young guys because at least there's a certain amount of money that you can't go over with these younger guys. And so because of that, it's a lot more affordable. So that is, that blend of the older players and the younger players is really unique. And the guys that can figure that out the right way, I mean, take a look at what the Kansas City Chiefs did, John. They lose their receiver, right? Everybody says, oh, what are they going to do? How do they replace him? Well, they figured out a way. And so there always is a way. Sometimes you have to let some of those players go that demand huge salaries. Saquon might be one of those guys, but maybe they can figure it out. And if they can, it should be great for the Giants.
Yeah. Well, we've got one more Rebels Edge this week, folks. That's coming up tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern time. So make sure you tune in for that. Do a little 3 at 3 later today. Thanks for joining us. Pete, Jared, and I say have a great afternoon.
Introducing our new series of intimate in-person trading conferences in some of the greatest cities in America. It's Market Rebellion Live. Next up, this June in Sonoma County, California. Savor some of the finest wines in America while you level up your trading with Pete Najarian, John Najarian, AJ Monty, Ryan Mastro, and Bill Johnson. Sonoma is limited to just 25 seats to ensure every guest gets personal attention, so act now. Tickets are going fast.